Deep in space, far beyond where any human had ever traveled, a damaged alien ship drifted through the endless darkness. Its hull was torn open in several places, and strange blue liquid leaked from the wounds like blood. Inside, a dying creature pressed its three-fingered hand against a control panel that flickered with the last power the ship had left. The alien's large eyes, which had once been bright yellow, now faded to a dull orange as life slipped away. With its final breath, it activated the ship's emergency beacon. A simple message began broadcasting into the void, carrying mathematical patterns that any intelligent species should understand. The message told of genocide, of an entire race being wiped out by cruel invaders, and begged for help from anyone who might be listening. For months, the signal traveled through space, growing weaker with each passing day. It crossed empty systems and dead worlds, finding no one to hear its desperate plea. But then, in a small corner of the galaxy that most civilizations had never bothered to explore, the signal reached a blue and green planet where a young species had just begun to reach for the stars. Officer Riley sat in the communications room of the monitoring station floating near Neptune, watching the same boring displays she had stared at for 6 months. Nothing ever happened out here at the edge of human space. The most exciting event in recent memory had been a broken satellite that kept sending the same weather report over and over. She was half asleep when her equipment suddenly came alive with activity. The first thing she noticed was the pattern. It wasn't random static like most space noise. This was organized, mathematical, deliberate. Riley's heart began to race as she realized what she was looking at. This was the kind of signal that every human had dreamed of receiving since they first looked up at the stars. She grabbed her communications device and contacted Dr. Patel, the station's language expert. "Doctor, you need to get down here right now. I think we've got something." Dr. Patel arrived within minutes, still wearing his sleeping clothes. When he saw the patterns on Riley's screen, his face went pale. "This is it," he whispered. "This is actually it. We're not alone." For the next 18 hours, Dr. Patel worked without stopping to decode the alien message. He used every mathematical principle humans had discovered, every pattern recognition system they had built. Slowly, piece by piece, the message began to make sense. What he found made him wish he had never started. The aliens called themselves the Kythera. They were a peaceful people who had lived in harmony across several star systems for thousands of years. But 6 months ago, another species had arrived in their space. These newcomers called themselves the Hegemony, and they had come with a simple message: surrender or die. The Kythera had tried to negotiate. They offered to share their worlds, their technology, even their knowledge of other species in the galaxy. But the Hegemony wanted only one thing: complete control. When the Kythera refused to become slaves, the Hegemony began systematically destroying their worlds. The message included star charts showing the location of the Kythera's last remaining colonies. It begged any species that received the signal to send help, to intervene before an entire civilization was wiped from existence. But what worried Dr. Patel most was the timestamp on the message. It was already 3 weeks old. Within hours, the news reached Earth. Emergency meetings were called in every major capital. World leaders who had spent years arguing about trade disputes and border conflicts suddenly found themselves facing a decision that would affect the entire human race. Should they intervene in an alien war? Admiral Torres of the United Space Command stood before the Emergency Council, his weathered face grim. "We have no idea what we're dealing with out there. These hegemony forces could have weapons we can't even imagine. They might decide Earth is their next target." President Walsh leaned forward in her chair. "What do our military experts say about our chances?" "Honestly, we don't know. We've been building our space fleet to fight other humans. Alien technology could be completely different from anything we've prepared for." But there were others in the room who saw opportunity where others saw danger. General Foster, head of Earth's newest military division, had spent his career preparing for exactly this moment. With respect, Admiral, we've been wondering when we'd meet other species for decades. Now we know there are at least 2 of them out there, and one of them is apparently wiping out entire civilizations. Do we really want to wait and see if Earth is next on their list? The debate continued for hours. Some argued that humanity should stay hidden, should pretend they never received the message. Others insisted that if there were genocidal aliens in the galaxy, humanity needed to know about them sooner rather than later. The decision came when Dr. Patel announced his final analysis of the signal. "The message isn't just going to us," he said quietly. "It's broadcasting on multiple frequencies in multiple mathematical languages. Whoever sent this was trying to reach every intelligent species in the galaxy. And based on these energy readings I'm detecting, someone else is already heading toward the Kythera system." That changed everything. If other species were responding to the distress call, humanity couldn't afford to be left behind. They needed to know what was happening in their galactic neighborhood, needed to understand what threats might be lurking in the darkness between stars. The UDS Retribution was Earth's newest and most advanced warship. Built in the orbital shipyards above Mars, it carried the best technology humanity had developed: energy shields that could absorb and redirect attacks, weapon systems that could track multiple targets at once, and armor plating that had been tested against every weapon in Earth's arsenal. Within 24 hours of receiving the alien message, the Retribution was loaded with supplies and a full crew of Marines. Its commander, Captain Hayes, had spent 15 years fighting in Earth's various conflicts. He understood strategy, tactics, and most importantly, he understood that in war, the side that adapted fastest usually won. As the Retribution prepared to jump to faster-than-light travel, Captain Hayes addressed his crew over the ship's communications system. "We're about to make first contact with alien species. We don't know what we'll find out there, but we know that someone is committing genocide and someone else is trying to stop it. Our job is to gather information and, if possible, help the victims." The jump to FTL felt the same as it always did, like being stretched and compressed at the same time. But this time was different. This time, they weren't traveling to another human colony or investigating a distress call from their own species. They were heading into the unknown, carrying with them the hopes and fears of an entire planet. None of them knew that they were about to announce humanity's presence to the galaxy in the most violent way possible. The space around the Kythera homeworld looked like a graveyard of stars. Massive ships, each one larger than any human city, hung in the darkness like predatory beasts circling wounded prey. Their hulls were dark metal covered with strange symbols that seemed to glow with their own inner light. These were the hegemony dreadnoughts, and they were methodically destroying everything in their path. Below them, the once beautiful Kythera worlds burned. Orbital stations that had taken centuries to build were being torn apart by weapon beams that turned metal into vapor. Smaller Kythera ships darted between the giants like insects around elephants, their elegant curved hulls gleaming silver against the darkness. But for every shot they fired, the enemy returned 10. The UDS Retribution dropped out of FTL at the edge of the system, its sensors immediately overwhelmed by the scale of destruction. Captain Hayes stood on the bridge, watching the tactical displays with growing horror. Entire moons had been cracked open. Debris fields that had once been space cities drifted in slow, silent spirals. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Commander Stone, the ship's pilot. "How many people lived here?" Communications Officer Davis looked up from her station, her face pale. "I'm reading life signs on the planet's surface, but they're fading fast. And, Captain, I'm picking up more ships moving in from the outer system. These aren't all of them." Hayes nodded grimly. The hegemony force was even larger than the Kythera, message had suggested. But what struck him most was how they fought. The alien dreadnoughts moved in straight lines, taking turns to fire their massive weapons at fixed targets. They seemed to follow some kind of pattern, like they were following rules that no one had explained to the humans. "Take us in closer," Hayes ordered. "But keep us at maximum sensor range. I want to understand what we're dealing with before we announce our presence." The Retribution moved silently through the debris field, its advanced stealth systems hiding it from alien sensors. What they saw made the entire crew angry. The hegemony wasn't just destroying military targets. They were systematically obliterating hospitals, schools, civilian shelters. This wasn't war, it was extermination. One of the surviving Kithara ships suddenly broke formation and headed straight for the nearest hegemony dreadnought. It was a suicide run, a desperate attempt to damage the enemy even at the cost of its own destruction. The alien ship's weapons blazed as it closed the distance, but the hegemony vessel didn't even bother to change course. It simply fired once, and the Kithara ship vanished in a ball of superheated gas. That was when Hayes made his decision. "Open communications channel, all frequencies." "Sir?" Davis looked confused. "What should I transmit?" "Standard first contact protocol. Mathematical sequences, peaceful intentions, requests for dialogue." The message went out in every language humans had developed for talking to aliens. Prime numbers, basic mathematical constants, simple pictographs showing solar systems, and peaceful meetings between different species. Everything humanity had prepared for this moment. The response was immediate and terrifying. The nearest hegemony dreadnought, a massive thing that looked like a crystalline fortress, turned toward them and fired without warning. The energy beam that lanced out was more powerful than anything in Earth's arsenal, a concentrated stream of destruction that could have melted mountains. But it never reached the Retribution. The human ship's adaptive shielding systems, designed to handle multiple types of energy weapons, absorbed the alien attack and redistributed the energy harmlessly into space. What should have been humanity's destruction became nothing more than a light show. "All hands to battle stations," Hayes announced calmly. "It appears diplomacy has failed. What happened next would be talked about in alien military academies for centuries to come." The hegemony ships, used to enemies that fought according to established rules, found themselves facing something they had never encountered: human military tactics. The Retribution didn't charge forward like the Kithara ships had done. Instead, it disappeared from sensors, using advanced stealth technology to become invisible. When it reappeared, it was behind the hegemony formation, targeting the rear shield generators of the lead dreadnought with precise, surgical strikes. Lieutenant. Commander Stone piloted the ship like it was a fighter craft, dancing between enemy weapon beams with maneuvers that should have been impossible for something so large. The human ship twisted and rolled through space, never staying in one place, long enough for the alien gunners to get a solid lock. "Their weapons are powerful but slow," reported Tactical Officer Brown. "They're designed for fighting enemies that stay still and trade shots. They can't handle our speed and maneuverability." Colonel Brooks, the head of the Marine complement, studied the alien ships on his displays. "Look at their formation. They're lined up like ancient sailing ships taking turns to fire. They're not coordinating their attacks at all." It was true. Each hegemony dreadnought seemed to be fighting its own individual battle, not working together as a team. When one ship moved to get a better firing angle, it blocked the shots of its neighbors. When they tried to surround the Retribution, they got in each other's way. Hayes saw the opportunity immediately. "Stone, take us through their formation, maximum speed, random evasion pattern. Brooks, I want your Marines ready for boarding actions." What followed was a masterpiece of human military thinking. The Retribution shot through the enemy fleet like an arrow, firing precisely targeted shots at critical systems while avoiding the aliens' clumsy return fire. Each pass disabled another dreadnought, knocking out weapons, shields, or engines with surgical precision. The surviving Cathara ships watched in amazement as the small human vessel carved through the hegemony fleet. For the first time in months, they had hope. These newcomers, whoever they were, fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. The battle ended when the Retribution targeted the command ship's communication array. Without their rigid command structure, the remaining hegemony vessels began, firing randomly, hitting each other as often as they hit their intended targets. 3 of their dreadnoughts were destroyed by friendly fire before their commanders realized what was happening. The surviving aliens retreated in disorder, their formation broken and their confidence shattered. They had never faced an enemy that fought so creatively. As the last hegemony ship fled the system, the remaining Cathara vessels approached the Retribution cautiously. The lead ship broadcast a message in the same mathematical language humans had used, but this time the patterns were different. They showed gratitude, amazement, and a desperate desire to understand how such a small force had defeated an enemy that had seemed invincible. Captain Hayes authorized first contact protocols, but this time he was dealing with the victims, not the aggressors. When the Cathara delegation came aboard, they moved with the graceful motions of a species that had evolved in low gravity. Their large eyes showed intelligence and curiosity, but also fear and exhaustion. Their leader, who introduced himself as Ambassador Quinn, spoke through a translation device that converted his musical language into human words. "Your species fights unlike anything we have ever seen. The hegemony has conquered dozens of worlds, using the same tactics they used here. No one has ever defeated them in open battle." Hayes studied the alien diplomat, noting the way Quinn's people moved with careful precision, like they were performing a dance. "How do your people usually fight wars?" "We follow the codes of honorable combat. Ships line up at agreed distances. Commanders issue formal challenges. Battles are fought according to established rules that minimize casualties and destruction." The captain exchanged glances with his officers. No wonder the hegemony had been so successful. They were fighting enemies who had handicapped themselves with artificial rules, while the hegemony simply used overwhelming force. "Ambassador," Hayes said carefully, "I think we need to talk." The Cathara flagship Harmony's song was unlike anything humans had ever imagined. Its corridors curved and flowed like the inside of a seashell, and the walls seemed to be grown rather than built. Bioluminescent panels provided soft, warm light. That reminded Captain Hayes of sunlight filtering through water. Everything about the ship suggested a species that valued beauty and harmony over raw functionality. Ambassador Quinn led the human delegation through halls filled with refugees from the destroyed worlds. Cathara families huddled together in makeshift shelters, their large eyes following the strange aliens who had somehow driven off their tormentors. Children peeked out from behind their parents, curious despite their fear. "These are all that remain of the outer colonies," Quinn explained, his musical voice carrying notes of deep sadness. 3 billion souls lived in our system before the hegemony arrived. Now we number less than 50,000. Dr. Kim, the Retribution's science officer, studied the refugees with professional interest but growing horror. "How long have you been fighting this war?" "Fighting is not the correct word," replied another Cathara, this one wearing what appeared to be military insignia. "I am Fleet Commander Reth. We have been dying for 8 months. The hegemony follows no rules of civilized warfare. They do not accept surrenders. They do not spare civilians. They simply destroy everything." The briefing room where they gathered was a circular space with holographic displays showing the current state of the galaxy. What Captain Hayes saw made him understand why the aliens had been so easily defeated. Red markers showed hegemony territory, spreading across dozens of star systems like a virus. Each marker represented a conquered world, a destroyed civilization. "The hegemony has existed for over 2 centuries, Ambassador Quinn began. They have a simple philosophy. Any species that cannot defend itself deserves to be enslaved or destroyed. They have conquered 43 different civilizations using the same basic strategy. Colonel Brooks leaned forward in his chair. What strategy is that? Fleet Commander Reth activated the holographic display, showing the standard hegemony attack pattern. They arrive in overwhelming numbers and demand immediate surrender. If refused, they select one planet and destroy it completely as an example. Most species surrender at that point, and those that don't are systematically exterminated. The hegemony does not negotiate. They do not show mercy. They view other species as resources to be harvested or obstacles to be removed. Dr. Kim studied the tactical displays with growing amazement. Your fleets fight in formation battles, standing in lines and taking turns to shoot at each other? Of course, Reth replied, sounding confused by the question. How else would civilized beings conduct warfare? There are rules, traditions that have existed for thousands of years, honor codes that prevent unnecessary destruction and loss of life. Hayes exchanged glances with his officers. The aliens had handicapped themselves so severely that they couldn't win even when they outnumbered the enemy. Commander Reth, what would happen if one of your ships broke formation during battle? That would be unthinkable. A captain who abandoned the battle line would be court-martialed and exiled. It would be the most shameful act possible. Even if it meant winning the battle? Reth's large eyes blinked in confusion. Victory without honor is meaningless. What would be the point of survival if we abandoned everything that makes us civilized? The conversation continued for hours, with both sides trying to understand concepts that seemed completely foreign. The humans learned that galactic civilization was built on elaborate codes of conduct that governed everything from trade negotiations to territorial disputes. War itself was seen as a regrettable necessity that should be conducted with minimal damage to both sides. The hegemony had succeeded because they ignored these rules completely. While other species limited themselves to honorable combat, the hegemony used every advantage they could find. They attacked civilian targets, used weapons of mass destruction, and fought with the single goal of total victory regardless of cost. How many species are part of your alliance? Hayes asked. 17 surviving civilizations have joined the Coalition of Free Worlds, Quinn replied. We share intelligence, coordinate our few remaining military assets, and try to evacuate civilians before the hegemony arrives, but we are losing. Every month brings news of another fallen world. Dr. Kim pulled up the star charts on his tablet, comparing them to human navigation data. These hegemony territories, they're moving toward the outer rim of the galaxy, toward unexplored space. Toward your space, Quinn confirmed grimly. We estimate they will encounter your worlds within 2 years, possibly less. That revelation changed the entire dynamic of the conversation. This wasn't just about helping alien refugees. Earth itself was directly threatened by an enemy that had already proven it could destroy entire civilizations. Colonel Brooks studied the hegemony military data with a professional eye. Their ground forces rely on fear and intimidation. Look at this footage from the Talarian conquest. They use weapons designed to cause maximum terror rather than tactical effectiveness. Their soldiers advance in straight lines with no attempt at cover or maneuver. Because it has always worked, Fleet Commander Reth explained. Most species surrender rather than face such overwhelming displays of force. But what happens when they face someone who doesn't surrender? The Cathara commander was quiet for a long moment. No one has ever not surrendered, until today. The implications were staggering. The hegemony had built their entire military doctrine around intimidation and brute force because no one had ever challenged their methods. They had never faced an enemy that used deception, tactical flexibility, or asymmetric warfare. Hayes pulled up the battle recordings from their encounter with the hegemony fleet. When we attacked your enemies, they seemed confused by our tactics. Their ships couldn't track our movements, couldn't coordinate their responses. You fought without honor, Reth said, but there was no condemnation in his voice, only wonder. You used stealth. You attacked from behind. You targeted systems that were not weapons. By all the codes of civilized warfare, such tactics are forbidden. But they worked. Yes, they worked better than anything we have tried in 8 months of dying. Dr. Kim had been analyzing the hegemony ship designs while they talked. What he found was both encouraging and terrifying. Their technology is actually less advanced than ours in some ways. Their shields are powerful but inflexible. They're designed to absorb massive frontal attacks, not adapt to changing weapon frequencies. Their weapons are incredibly destructive but slow to target and fire. They've never needed precision, Ambassador Quinn realized. When your strategy is to destroy everything, accuracy becomes irrelevant. The meeting was interrupted by urgent communications from the Retribution. Lieutenant Commander Stone appeared on the holographic communicator, her face grim. Captain, we're detecting massive energy signatures moving toward this system. Something big is coming, and it's coming fast. Hayes stood immediately. How long do we have? Based on their current speed, maybe 6 hours. Sir, the energy readings are off the charts. This is bigger than anything we faced before. Fleet Commander Reth's skin changed color, shifting from its normal blue-green to a pale gray. The hegemony never sends just one fleet. When they meet unexpected resistance, they call for reinforcements. How many reinforcements? Brooks asked, though he already dreaded the answer. Everything they have in the sector. Hundreds of ships. Captain Hayes looked around the room at the faces of both humans and aliens, seeing the same realization in every expression. The small victory they had won was about to become a massacre unless they could find a way to fight an enemy that outnumbered them 1,000 to 1. But as he studied the tactical data, Hayes began to smile. The hegemony was bringing their entire force to crush what they thought was a single enemy ship. They were concentrating their fleet in one location, following predictable patterns, preparing to fight the kind of battle they had always fought. They had no idea they were about to face something completely new, human military doctrine applied on an interstellar scale. The emergency session of Earth's Global Defense Council lasted less than an hour, but the decisions made in that room would reshape the galaxy forever. Admiral Torres stood before holographic displays showing the approaching hegemony fleet, his face carved from stone. The numbers were terrifying. Over 300 alien dreadnoughts moving toward the Cathara system, and long-range sensors had detected their quantum wake signatures pointing directly back toward Earth. They know where we are, General Foster stated flatly. Captain Hayes's ship left a trail when it jumped to FTL. The hegemony followed it back to Sol system. President Walsh studied the tactical projections with growing concern. How long before they reach Earth? Best estimates put them at our doorstep in 36 hours, Torres replied. That's if they come directly. If they decide to destroy every human colony along the way, we might have a week. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity had spent decades building colonies throughout their local star cluster. Mars, Europa, Titan, the mining, stations in the asteroid belt, the research outposts around Proxima Centauri. All of them were now targets for an enemy that specialized in genocide. But Dr. Martinez, head of the Strategic Planning Division, had been studying the alien intelligence, data that Captain Hayes had transmitted. There's something we need to consider. Based on the Cathara reports, the hegemony has never faced organized resistance. Every species they've conquered either surrendered immediately or fought using obsolete tactics. What are you suggesting? President Walsh asked. That we have advantages they don't know about. Our military doctrine is built around fighting enemies who are as smart and adaptable as we are. We've spent centuries perfecting the art of war against ourselves. The hegemony has spent centuries fighting enemies who handicapped themselves with honor codes. General Foster nodded slowly. We've been preparing for interstellar war without knowing it. Every conflict in human history has taught us new ways to fight, new ways to adapt and overcome. The decision was unanimous. Humanity would not wait passively for the hegemony to arrive. They would meet the enemy on their own terms, using every advantage their species had developed through millennia of warfare. Within hours, the largest military mobilization in human history was underway. Battle fleets launched from Luna Base, their crews trained in tactics that the galaxy had never seen. The Mars shipyards, which had been building exploration vessels just days before, retooled their production lines to manufacture weapons of war. The Jupiter mining platforms became ammunition factories, converting raw asteroids into projectiles that could punch through alien armor. Commander Walsh led the first wave, 12 ships that had been designed to fight other human vessels, but now carried modifications based on the Retribution's battle data. Each ship was equipped with new targeting systems that could track multiple enemies simultaneously, electronic warfare packages that could disrupt alien communications, and most importantly, human creativity applied to the art of destruction. Hegemony fleet arrived at Earth expecting to find a primitive world defended by obsolete weapons and predictable tactics. Instead, they found empty space and a single message broadcast on all frequencies. Welcome to Sol System. Humanity would like to teach you about war. What followed was less a battle than a demonstration of human military evolution. The first hegemony ships to enter the system found themselves surrounded by enemies they couldn't see. Stealth-equipped, human vessels appeared from behind asteroids, from within the rings of Saturn, from the shadows of Jupiter's moons. Each attack was precisely coordinated, targeting critical systems with surgical precision. The alien admiral, Overlord Thex, had conquered 43 worlds using the same basic strategy. Overwhelming firepower applied without subtlety or finesse. His ships lined up in the traditional battle formation and began their systematic bombardment of what they assumed were defensive positions. But the humans weren't where the aliens expected them to be. Lieutenant Commander Park led a squadron of fighters that had been hidden inside a hollow asteroid. When the hegemony dreadnoughts passed by, assuming the rock was just another piece of space debris, the fighters erupted from concealment and struck at the aliens' engine systems with weapons designed to cause cascading failures rather than simple destruction. The hegemony ships found their propulsion systems failing, their navigation computers crashing, their weapon systems targeting their own vessels. This wasn't the kind of damage they were used to dealing with. Their enemies had always tried to destroy them outright, not disable them with precision strikes that turned their own technology against them. But the real surprise came when Admiral Torres activated humanity's secret weapon, coordination. Every ship in the Solar Defense Fleet had been practicing the same maneuver for months, a complex dance of timing and positioning that required split-second communication between dozens of vessels. At Torres's signal, every human ship in the system fired, simultaneously at the hegemony flagship. Not with their most powerful weapons, but with precisely calibrated energy beams that arrived at exactly the same moment from exactly the right angles. The alien shields, designed to absorb massive single attacks, were overwhelmed by the coordinated strike pattern. Overlord Thex died without understanding what had killed him. His ship's final transmission was a confused report about enemies that fought like a single organism, coordinating their attacks with impossible precision. The surviving hegemony forces tried to retreat, but they found their escape routes blocked by human vessels that had anticipated their movements. Ships that tried to jump to FTL discovered that their navigation systems had been infected with viruses that sent them tumbling into empty space. Others found their communication arrays jammed by signals that turned their own transmissions into white noise. The battle ended with the complete destruction of the hegemony invasion force. Not a single alien ship escaped to carry word back to their empire. But the humans had recorded everything, and their message was clear. Any force that threatened Earth would face the combined might of a species that had turned warfare into an art form. As the debris from the alien fleet drifted through the Sol system, Admiral Torres contacted Captain Hayes in the Cathara system. "Hayes, this is Torres. The home front is secure. Now tell me about these coalition forces. I think it's time we had a serious conversation about joint military operations." The transmission that followed would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. For the first time in centuries, species that had been steadily losing ground to the hegemony learned that victory was possible. They learned that there was a new player in the galactic community, one that brought concepts the enemy had never encountered: tactical flexibility, strategic thinking, and the absolute refusal to accept defeat. But most importantly, they learned that humans had something the hegemony couldn't understand or counter: the ability to work together as a unified force while maintaining individual creativity and adaptation. It was a combination that had never existed in galactic warfare, and it was about to turn a war of extermination into a war of liberation. In the wreckage of Overlord Thex's flagship, automated systems continued transmitting a final message back to hegemony space. Unknown enemy encountered. Conventional tactics ineffective. Request immediate strategic reassessment. But by the time the message reached its destination, the war had already changed forever. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, the galaxy looked very different from the star charts the hegemony had been using for centuries. Red markers that had shown conquered worlds were being systematically replaced with blue ones representing liberated systems. The tide of war had turned, and for the first time in 200 years, the seemingly unstoppable empire was retreating. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. In secret bases scattered across the outer rim, human military advisors worked alongside alien strategists, teaching concepts that no galactic civilization had ever developed. The Cathara learned about guerrilla warfare, using their ships' superior speed to strike at hegemony supply convoys and vanish before reinforcements could arrive. The crystalline Vorthon discovered the art of deception, projecting false sensor readings that made single ships appear as entire fleets. The aquatic Delphians, whose homeworld had been one of the first to fall, mastered the use of electronic warfare to turn hegemony weapons against their own forces. But the real change was philosophical. For millennia, galactic warfare had been governed by rigid codes of honor that prioritized ceremony over effectiveness. Species fought according to predetermined rules, accepted defeat gracefully, and viewed war as a regrettable necessity to be conducted with minimal casualties on both sides. Humans had no such limitations. They viewed war as a problem to be solved, using any means necessary. If stealth worked better than direct confrontation, they used stealth. If deception was more effective than brute force, they deceived their enemies. If working together produced better results than individual heroics, they coordinated their actions with mechanical precision. Admiral Hayes, now commanding the Joint Human-Alien Task Force from his flagship Defiance, studied the tactical displays, showing the next phase of their campaign. The hegemony had withdrawn their forces to the Nexus Gate, a massive space station that controlled the main shipping routes between the inner and outer galaxy. It was their last major stronghold, defended by over 500 warships and protected by weapons platforms that could destroy entire fleets. "It's the perfect defensive position," Fleet Commander Reth admitted, his musical voice carrying notes of frustration. "The Nexus Gate controls the only stable hyperspace route through the galactic core. Any force trying to attack it would have to approach through a narrow corridor where the hegemony could concentrate all their firepower." Colonel Brooks, now serving as the task force's ground operations commander, pointed to the intelligence reports scattered across the holographic table. "That's assuming we attack it directly. What if we don't?" The alien commanders looked confused. Direct assault was the only military tactic they understood. The idea of attacking an enemy stronghold without actually attacking it made no sense to them. Dr. Kim, who had become humanity's expert on hegemony technology, activated a new set of displays. We've been analyzing their communication patterns for months. The hegemony fleet at Nexus Gate is under the command of Warlord Drex, their most experienced military leader. He's never lost a battle in 50 years of conquest. So how do we beat him? Ambassador Quinn asked. Hayes smiled with the expression of a human who had just solved a particularly challenging puzzle. We don't beat him. We make him beat himself. The plan that Hayes outlined was so audacious that several alien commanders initially refused to believe it was possible. It required perfect timing, flawless coordination, and most importantly, the hegemony's complete ignorance of human tactical thinking. The first phase began 3 weeks later, when intelligence reports reached Warlord Drex, indicating that the human-led coalition was massing for a three-pronged assault on hegemony territory. The reports were completely accurate, which made them completely false. Admiral Hayes had indeed split his forces into 3 groups, each one appearing to prepare for independent attacks on different hegemony strongholds. Long-range sensors detected massive fleet buildups at strategic locations throughout the Outer Rim. Communication intercepts revealed detailed planning for simultaneous strikes that would stretch hegemony defenses to their breaking point. Warlord Drex, faced with the prospect of fighting 3 separate battles against an enemy that had already proven capable of defeating superior numbers, made the logical decision. He divided his own forces, sending fleets to defend each threatened location while keeping the bulk of his ships at Nexus Gate. What he didn't realize was that he was fighting the same enemy 3 times. The human task force, using advanced FTL, jumping techniques, and electronic warfare systems that could mimic multiple fleet signatures, had created the illusion of being in 3 places at once. Each coalition fleet was actually the same group of ships using different identification codes and holographic projectors to appear as separate forces. When Warlord Drex's divided fleets arrived at their defensive positions, they found themselves facing what appeared to be overwhelming enemy numbers. Each hegemony commander, convinced that they were facing the main coalition assault, called for immediate reinforcements from Nexus Gate. The second phase began when Drex, responding to increasingly desperate calls for help from his subordinates, stripped his home base of defenders to reinforce what he believed were 3 critical battles. The Nexus Gate, which had been protected by 500 warships, was reduced to a skeleton force of less than 50 vessels. That was when Admiral Hayes revealed the true nature of human warfare, the willingness to do whatever it takes to win. The real coalition fleet, which had been hidden in a nebula using stealth technology that made them invisible to hegemony sensors, emerged directly above Nexus Gate. The hegemony defenders found themselves facing a force they couldn't possibly stop, attacking from a direction they had never considered possible. But Hayes wasn't interested in destroying the station. Instead, he wanted to capture it intact, along with its massive communication arrays and strategic databases. The assault was surgical, precise, designed to disable rather than destroy. Human Marines trained in zero-gravity combat techniques that no galactic military had ever developed boarded the station through breached airlocks and secured critical systems before the defenders could destroy them. The battle for Nexus Gate lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the most important strategic position in the galaxy was under coalition control, and Warlord Drex found himself commanding scattered fleets that couldn't communicate with each other or coordinate their responses. The final phase was almost anticlimactic. Isolated hegemony forces, cut off from their command structure and facing enemies that appeared and disappeared at will, began surrendering rather than face annihilation. For the first time in their empire's history, hegemony commanders chose survival over honor. But the war's true end came when Warlord Drex, in a rage at being outmaneuvered by what he still considered primitive aliens, ordered his remaining ships in a desperate assault on Earth itself. He would show these upstart humans what happened to species that dared to challenge the hegemony's dominance. The hegemony fleet that arrived at Sol System was the largest armada ever assembled, over 200 dreadnoughts carrying enough firepower to crack planets. Drex expected to find the human homeworld defended by whatever forces had been left behind, while the main fleet fought at distant battlefields. Instead, he found Sol System completely empty, except for a single communication buoy broadcasting, a message in perfect hegemony language. While you were traveling here, we destroyed your home fleet, captured your capital worlds, and liberated every species in your former empire. Your empire no longer exists. This message will repeat every hour until you surrender unconditionally. Warlord Drex died when his flagship's command bridge was breached by hegemony soldiers who had decided their commander's madness was more dangerous than human retaliation. The remaining fleet surrendered without firing a shot. The galaxy that emerged from the war was transformed beyond recognition. The rigid codes of honorable combat were replaced by human concepts of tactical flexibility and strategic thinking. Species that had been enemies for centuries learned to work together as unified forces. Most importantly, the idea that any problem could be solved if you were willing to think creatively enough became the foundation of a new galactic civilization. 5 years later, Ambassador Quinn visited Earth as part of the first diplomatic mission from the Galactic Coalition of Free Worlds. As his ship approached the blue and green planet that had changed everything, he marveled at the orbital installations, the space elevators, the massive shipyards that were building vessels designed for exploration rather than war. During his meeting with President Walsh, Quinn asked the question that had puzzled alien philosophers since the war ended. How did your species develop such effective military strategies? What do you call your approach to warfare? President Walsh smiled and gave the most human answer possible. We call it Tuesday. The thing about humans is that we've been fighting each other for so long that we turned war into an art form. When we finally found someone else to fight, it wasn't even a fair contest. As Quinn's ship departed Earth, he carried with him the knowledge that had taken the galaxy centuries to learn. That sometimes the most important advantage in any conflict isn't superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but simply the willingness to think differently than everyone else. The message that went out to every species in the galaxy was simple. Humanity was here, they were willing to help, and they had redefined what was possible when intelligent beings worked together toward a common goal. The age of the hegemony was over. The age of cooperation had begun, and at the center of it all was a small blue planet whose inhabitants had turned their greatest weakness, their tendency toward conflict, into the galaxy's greatest strength.